Hello friends and viewers. Today we are going to discuss about the great debates in international relations. I, Dr. Devashish Mitra, welcome you all to my channel Basics of Political Science. If you do like the video, please subscribe, press the like button and don't forget to press the bell icon for the notification of future videos. Thank you. Before moving into the debates regarding the various issues and theories of international relations, we must concentrate on why there are debates. As you all know, international relations in the most basic sense have existed since neighboring tribes started throwing rocks at or trading with each other. From the days of Peloponnesian War through European policies to ultimately nation states, there are trends that can be observed before the term existed. Likewise, the evolution of various thinking from the Enlightenment onwards expressed itself in calls for a better, more cooperative world before finding practical application, if little success after the Great War. It was following this conflict that the discipline of ire emerged in 1919 at the University of Wales. Like any science, theory was ire's foundation in how it defined itself and viewed the world it attempted to explain, and when contradictory theories emerged, clashes inevitably followed. These disputes throughout ire's short history have come to be known as the Great Debates. And though disputed, it is generally felt that there have been four, namely realism, idealism, or some scholars termed as utopian liberalism. There are traditional versus behavioralism, and likewise. All have some kind of an effect on IR theory, some greater than other, but each merit analysis of their respective impacts. From that scenario, we will try to explain three basic causes or factors behind these debates. First, the result of cumulative theory building. The rapid growth in theoretical perspectives can be seen as the result of cumulative theory building and some kind of a process of professionalization within an academic discipline that can now look back on a history of more than 90 years. Against the background of the Versailles Treaty, it was institutionalized as a science and as an academic discipline through the establishment of the first chair in IR, as we all know, or the so-called Woodrow Wilson Chair at the University of Wales. The first professorship in IR was devoted to the systematic study of the causes of war and the conditions for world peace. This aspect of cumulative theory building is particularly pertinent to the discipline of IR. Even today, there is no consensus on how best to understand its subject matter in conceptual and theoretical terms or its methods of knowledge production. Second, adaptation from other social sciences. This broad range of theoretical perspectives in IR is the result of a process, one increasingly hard to keep up with, of the adaptation of insights from related and neighboring social sciences. It is in fact a key characteristic of IR, in common with all social science disciplines, that it cannot be neatly separated from disciplines such as sociology or political philosophy and theory, nor even from economics, political geography, psychology, or law. Drawing on the categories and concepts found in these neighboring disciplines can often help IR achieve additional insights. This is particularly true when we consider that international relations are becoming increasingly globalized. The object of study no longer fits neatly within the boundaries of a discipline historically devoted to the study of interstate relations. And subsequently, this has dismantled the boundaries between formerly separate academic disciplines and brought to the fore the social character of international relations. Consequently, IR scholars now need to engage in genuine social theorizing rather than maintaining an exclusive domain of IR theories devoted to the study of interstate relations. Third, and closely related to the second point, because it is a social science, there is always a close interplay between theory building in IR and the discipline's historical and socio-political context. Progress in IR theory is closely linked with events in the real world in international politics. For instance, as the development of the bipolar system following the Second World War, the decolonization of large parts of Africa and Asia in the late 1950s and early 1960s, the Vietnam War and the global economic crisis triggered by the oil price shocks of the 1970s, the rise of emerging powers since the 2000s, and what we generally perceive as the process of globalization. Global political upheaval such as the end of the East-West conflict, the shift in the role of sovereign nation states associated with globalization, and the increasing impact of transnational non-state actors rooted in economy and society have exercised and continue to exercise an enduring influence on a whole generation of theory-oriented scholars. The theory of IR finds itself confronted with new challenges in the light of phenomena such as failing or failed states and the resulting security and developmental tasks involved in international state building. Thus, there are recurring debates which continue to press and build the discipline what we see today. Thus, we see four great debates in the history of the discipline till date. First is the realism v idealism, or as some scholars stated as utopian liberalism. Second, traditionalists versus behavioralists. Third, there is a debate on its inter-paradigm courses. And the third is the mainstream versus the new approaches. The first of these debates, occurring in the 1930s and 1940s, was between realism and idealism. The key bone of contention in the first great theoretical debate was the question of whether, and if so, to what extent, there can be progress in the relations between states. In light of the experience of the First World War, the idealists cherished the hope of avoiding future wars through the establishment of international institutions such as the League of Nations. Realists, meanwhile, in view of states' power politics within a world essentially viewed as anarchic, dismissed such hopes as mere wishful thinking and utopianism. The failure of the League of Nations as an instrument for ensuring international peace and the outbreak of the Second World War seemed to indicate that the realists were right. The argument between realism and idealism was followed in the 1960s by the second great debate, that between traditionalists defending a humanistic methodology and behaviorists or scientists emphasizing the importance of methodological rigor to the discipline. In essence, this was a discipline specific version of the general social scientific dispute over the question of whether human understanding or natural scientific explanation should take priority. Traditionalists drew on the method of intuition, experience, and textual interpretation characteristic of the humanities to justify their statements about international relations. On the other hand, their scientist counterpart, meanwhile, working on the premise of the methodological unity of sciences, claimed that it was both possible and necessary to take a natural scientific approach to understanding of the social world. The epistemological goal of a scientific approach is to obtain empirically verifiable statements and universally valid theories of international relations on the basis of a systematic description and causal explanation for any of the events around. The second debate is often thought of as having been owned by the behaviorists, at least judging from how IR as a discipline is practiced in the United States. The application of natural scientific methods triggered a period of professionalization that did much to establish IR as a distinct academic subdiscipline. Narrating this theoretical development as a series of great debates, now it has clearly facilitated a neat classification of IR theory. This, however, has been increasingly contested, at least since the identification of a third debate beginning in the 1980s. The term third debate is used for two very different theoretical discourses: the inter-paradigm debate between realists, pluralists, and Marxist perspectives on world politics, which originated in the 1970s and continued into the 1980s, and the debate between explaining and understanding between positivism and post-positivism, or between rationalism and reflectivism since the mid 1980s. It is because realism retained its dominant position, but real world events such as the Vietnam conflict and the oil crisis forced it to reassess its core tenets. Kenneth Walls' 1979 theory of international politics aimed to reboot realism, moving it on from a foundation in human nature towards a structural realism more associated with the international system, where Walls recognized that units, that is, nation states, could indeed co-act in such an anarchical environment, but that their functional similarities or differences would still determine the extent of such relations. Realism also took on a more scientific quality compared to past groundings in philosophy, history, and human nature. It moved away from the kind of generalized reflections Kaplan had criticized and towards precise statements and a vision of theory as advocated by behavioralists, earning it the label of neorealism. Behavioralism's impact also developed liberalism's precision and focus in what it sought to analyze, principally on how institutions could influence state behavior through complex interdependence. Such integration scholarship emerged through the 1940s and 1950s, taking on a more regional tone in the 1960s before a third transnational stage was advocated by neoliberal institutional theorists. Among them were Robert Cohen and Joseph Nye, who wished to emphasize the effects transnational relations had on the interstate system, especially in areas of national sovereignty, foreign policies, and others. Neoliberalism aged closer to neorealism in this era, with this acceptance of an anarchical system and state egoism, just as the latter, that is, neorealism, came to accept interrelated entities which were given by the former, that is, neoliberalism. Ultimately, both positions see reality as they want to, and so conclusions from empirical testings are inevitably influenced by the theory behind those observations. The most recent debate of this series, emerging in the late 1980s and with the starting of 1990s, is arguably one of the most serious. On one side, rationalists inclusive of realist and liberalist positions are positivistic in methodology, and while accepting the complexities of the social world, prefer to measure and analyze what can be observed. The opposition reflectivists reject these positivist methods of knowledge generation, preferring interpretative and subjective study and a belief that the values cannot be separate from observation. Given rationalists' paradigm have emerged through supposedly flawed and biased positivistic methodology, reflectivists reject that system and any theorizing within it. Reflectivism includes such alternative approaches to higher theory as postmodernism, feminism, constructivism, and critical theory, which are basically known as the emancipatory positions, such as anti-colonialism, capable of falling under the umbrella of the latter. Postmodernism defies the self-fulfilling link between the status quo and the knowledge it generates, asking how real truth can be discovered inside such a weighted system, while feminism views issues in IR through the lens of women, their place in world politics, and gender issues. Critical theory, on the other hand, is a Marxian spin-off that attempts to analyze, identify, and assist emancipatory social changes. Constructivism is a social theory and has diverse facets itself, but is generally of the view that social ideas define the world and impact of material reality. Given their differing groups' positions, internal discourses, and inability to challenge rationalists on their own terms, it has been difficult for reflectivists to truly undermine the former, a difficult enough task without these issues, given the unlikelihood that rationalists would ever willingly deconstruct their fundamental assumptions of IR. Yet, over the duration of this debate, some changes occurred, and this occurrence of changes has led this discipline to a new height.